So, as we established in Module 3.2.1, a lobbyist is someone who represents an interest group before government, is usually, but not always, compensated financially for doing so, and is required to register with the government in which he or she lobbies, whether state or federal government. The lobbyist's primary goal is almost always to influence policy. As they say, money talks, and it is one of the main resources lobbyists use to influence policy. The early law that governs how lobbyists may allocate their resources and required registration was the 1946 Legislative Reorganization Act, also called the Federal Regulation of Lobbying Act. This act required lobbyists to clearly state who their clients were and what they were lobbying for. For that reason, the act was challenged on the idea that it violated the right to freedom of speech in the First Amendment. The Supreme Court upheld this law and rejected that claim in the 1954 Supreme Court case, United States v. Harris. But the court said that the law only applied to the lobbying of congressmen, not other government officials, such as governors. In the years after this case, the number of registered lobbyists was about 7,000, but the real number of lobbyists trying to influence policy in D.C. was more like 70,000. There are easily more than 200,000 today. Many interest groups lobby both in Washington and at the state level. Each state has its own laws describing which individuals and entities must register. So the definition of lobbyists and interests and of what lobbying is and who must register to do it also vary from state to state. Therefore, while a citizen contracting a lawmaker to discuss an issue is generally not viewed as lobbying, an organization that devotes a certain amount of time and resources to contacting a lawmaker will probably be classified as lobbying. And because the definition changes from state to state, no good comprehensive list of lobbyists and interest groups really exists. But in 1995, the Lobbying Disclosure Act defined a lobbyist as anyone who spends more than 20% of his or her time lobbying government officials and is required to report twice a year, to file a report. This report will list clients and it will list the bills on which they worked. As already stated in Module 3.1, campaign finance laws require disclosure of campaign contributions given to political candidates by organizations. When I was a registered lobbyist in New Jersey, I had to file reports quarterly with that state that had different rules than the federal government for lobbyists. But I have also been what's called a grassroots lobbyist. The 1995 law did not apply to grassroots lobbyists, meaning they do not have to register with the federal government or disclose information on the issues they are putting resources towards. Grassroots lobbyists can be defined as lobbying done by professionals, concerned citizens, or not-for-profit organizations like churches, for example. While debating the Lobbying Disclosure Act, both Democrats and Republicans put restrictions on how much members of Congress can accept as gifts. Members of the House could not accept anything with monetary value, whereas senators could accept gifts up to $50 in value. When I worked for a U.S. senator, I was once given a thank you gift for helping one of his constituents in the form of a $250 gift certificate to a spa. Unfortunately, I had to return it to the constituent. And both houses of Congress banned all expense-paid trips. One of the biggest scandals involving this was around Jack Abramoff, a lobbyist with close ties to many in the Republican Party. He paid for 85 members of Congress to vacation in the U.S.-owned Mariana Islands in the Pacific. The government of the territory that Abramoff sent them to was a client of his. He was promoting the continuation of a sweatshop there by trying to get the federal government to exempt the island from paying the federal minimum wage. He also paid for a trip to Scotland for the majority whip of the House at that time, Tom DeLay. And he hired Tom DeLay's wife to research charities that other congressmen supported and paid her for those services. Abramoff was sentenced to 4 years in prison for tax evasion, fraud, and corruption of public officials, but he was released in half that time in 2010. About a decade ago, the law was changed, adding greater restrictions. Lobbyists were also required to report what was spent on dinners and parties in which people would make donations to candidates. But problems of undue corruption and undue influence on policies persist. And this has contributed in part to cynicism about government. We'll talk about trust in government in more detail in Module 4. Candidates often run on the promise to get money out of politics, but the way the two-party system is currently set up, it looks like the problems will remain. And while influencing policy is the primary goal, it is also important to remember that interest groups have other functions. They also monitor government activity and push for more transparency by government bodies and officials. The ICMA, or International City Council, City and County Management Association, it's just one such organization whose goal it is to foster better management practices to build better communities. They provide a guide as to how government officials at the local level can be more transparent. Organizations also serve as a means of political participation for members. For example, the United Nations Association, United States of America, exists to support the UN, and one of their activities is for members to participate in what's called their Members' Day on the Hill, where members go to schedule meetings with their congressmen. Interest groups also provide information to the public and to lawmakers. In fact, it says right on my resume, served as an information base to policymakers. Keep viewing the video and go through your readings and do all the questions.